My name is Noah Zinn. Today is Monday, May 14th. It's approximately 1 p.m. and I'm with Joe Pouncy. Can you spell your name, please?
Pouncy.
Thank you, sir. We are in the Texana room in the Fondren Library. So can you tell me a little bit about your childhood, some hobbies, your family?
Well, I'm from Dallas, Texas, and my folks been in Texas since 1851, and it's been Pouncy's one sort of another, been in Texas, been in this country since 1734. They were brought to South Carolina in 1734 from West Africa area, and so we have a extensive background in East Texas, the Pouncys. Went to Lincoln High School in Dallas, and ran track and did football. President of the was I president? I think I was president of the senior class. May have been. I can't remember. Been so long ago. And in '69 we competed in the state track, UIL state track meet, and set a couple of national records. In '70 we competed in the UIL state track meet and set 4 national records. And then we when I was a senior, I graduated from high school in 1970, Lincoln High School, all black school in South Dallas, and was fortunate enough to be recruited by, I don't know, a significant number of universities and colleges. University of Alabama, got a call from Bear Bryant, wanted me to come to University of Alabama, USC, Stanford, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, all those schools recruited us, me and my brother and I, but we decided to come to SMU because we had conducted some research. We knew something about the campus because we were involved in the Upward Bound program out here in '69 and '70, and we were out here every Saturday, and we were out here during the summers taking summer school courses, and we interacted with the teachers and all the folks. Tommy Edwards was the director of the program, and he was an energetic young black man that was inspiration to us all. And so we knew a little bit something about the campus, and we knew what had happened on this campus as far as an effort by administrations to incorporate black students and Hispanic students and students of color to this campus, starting in the 50s all the way through up to the 70s. And so that kind of was a drive behind us making a selection of here. Although we were close, I had signed a national letter of intent to go to Stanford. And then we got a visit from the track coach here, Jim Parr, and Jim Parr passed away this past fall, and a very amiable man, a likable man, ex-Marine, SMU graduate, and had this little buzz haircut, and we loved the man. My family loved the man. He just made a tremendous impact on us, about what he was about here at SMU, and about the individual, and so we decided to come to SMU because of people like Jim Parr and Tommy Edwards, and so in the spring of 1970, head athletic coordinator on campus, Hayden Fry, visited us at Lincoln High School. I think that's the first time any Southwest Conference coach had ever visited a predominantly black school in Dallas. The unwritten policy at the time was that Southwest Conference coaches, up until Jerry Levi's, now he recruited Jerry Levi's, and the unwritten rule up until the time of Jerry Levi's that those Southwest Conference coaches were not going to recruit any black athletes. But that was 5 years prior to us, and he already recruited Jerry Levi's, and he showed up at Lincoln High School, and that was quite an event. But we already had met Coach Parr, and although we had signed a national letter with Stanford and thoroughly upset those folks when we decided to go to SMU, I can recall the track coach at Stanford, he called and he was pretty angry, and we told him we're going to SMU, and he said, well, what's a SMU? Where is that? I know he was being facetious, but we decided to come to SMU, and we don't regret it.
Can you, I know we're going to backtrack here a little bit, but can you tell me about those UIL state meets in 69 and 70?
As many people may know, segregation was the thing in Texas, and the University Interscholastic League was a conference for athletics, fine arts, performing arts, speech, debate, and all those kind of things. And that conference bylaw, in the conference bylaws for UIL, it stated for white students only. You know, it was for white schools, white students only. All black students competed through the Prairie View A&M system, Prairie View Interscholastic System. They call it the old, quote, Negro League. About 1964-65, the director of that Prairie View League and the director of the UIL decided to get together, and they talked about merging the two leagues because they knew that integration was coming and desegregation of schools were coming. You know, you saw the segregation of schools begin with at SMU here in '55 with those kids, with those young men graduating from theology school and a couple of the Southwest Conference schools that already recruited black athletes. And so they decided to merge those leagues and just eliminate the Prairie View Interscholastic League. And in '69, that was the first meet. The tension between the black athletes from the black schools and white athletes from the white schools, and it was in Austin, and all the I don't know, I guess you want to call it the old timers at the time, all the adults at the time, the nerves were pretty tense because they didn't know how that was going to play out. They envisioned horror stories and everything else. And the world was watching. Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, all of these schools, all the states in this part of the South were watching what was going on in Austin in that experiment at that May UIL meet. Well, in '69, the meet went off great, with no instances. It was a great meet. We set 2 or 3 national records. We came back in '70 and set 4 national records in track. Me and my brother and our track team, and the Lincoln High School track team in '70 won the state track meet for the conference, you know, for the state. And so it was big. It was big, significant. And so schools began to take a peek at what was going on. At the time, again, DISD was still segregated. It was segregated I graduated in 1970, and the schools were still segregated. There was a lawsuit filed in 1970 by a gentleman named Tasby challenging the segregated schools in Dallas. And that suit wasn't resolved. The district wasn't considered to be, DISD, Dallas Public Schools, were not considered to be desegregated until 2001. And so under all that backdrop, 1970, we're graduating from high school. We're making a decision about college. And so here come SMU, and here come and they brought their background with what they were doing. And Hayden Fry was recruiting more athletes of color. And you had great coaches like Jim Parr, who was just a jewel of a man. My mother loved him to death, you know. And my mother and Viola Pouncy did not warm up to people very well. She was pretty standoffish. And Viola Pouncy, if you can get a smile out of Viola Pouncy, you are a very special person. And she liked that guy. She would tell us all the time, y'all get out there with that campus and do your best with Coach Parr. He's a good man. And so mother was a good choice. So she could determine character in a person, and she saw it in Jim Parr. And so we came out here, and the rest, as you know, as I can say, is history.
What was the when you got to SMU? What was the general atmosphere like in 1970?
It was electric. The atmosphere was electric. It was charged. It was a controlled explosion. It was a controlled charge. What we got here, we found out that we had the leeway and the freedom and opportunity to pursue whatever we want to pursue. Was there problems as far as people being insensitive to culture and race? Yes. It wasn't as prominent as when Jerry Levi's and those other folks prior to us were on this campus, but it was still here. It was still here. It was getting better, but it was still here. Like in any organization, in a large organization, you're gonna have it. You're gonna have those problems. The university and the people here on this campus were making a concerted effort to make this place all inclusive and to make this place a kind of a beacon for students like myself, and they did that through the Upward Bound program and the other programs, and we saw it. And so when the students got to this campus, they were pretty well armed to do things in a productive way. They felt like they were standing on the shoulders of the folks who graduated from the theology school in 1955, the folks that did the sit-in at the president's office in the early 60s, demanding equality and all those things, and we're standing on the shoulder of Levi's and everybody else. So we felt a big obligation to do our thing academically, to do our thing athletically, and to do the best that we could. There are some things we ignored. We noticed that a lot of the folks on campus in 1970 kept kind of within their little grouping, their cliques. There were some exceptions. We had people that we looked up to, like Charles Howard. He was with the University Men's Group, I think they called it, and there was other people. Rufus Cormier that was doing some things, that had done some things, football-wise, and written articles in daily campus. We looked up to a lot of people on this campus, but in general, the atmosphere was positive. That was a change a little bit. That was a change in the air. SMU was much of the same, but there was change, and the deal is that, was there any underlying current in some organizations on campus? I would guess so. But what happened was then, a lot of the students of my class, black students of my class, we focused on what we need to focus on, academics and things that we were doing. But there were a lot of other people of great will, goodwill, and some of the professors were just tremendous, and they talked about some of that stuff in one of my journalism courses. I think the teacher was Farrar, F-A-R-R-A-R, Farrar, maybe pronounce his name, been 40 years. And I can recall him talking about the atmosphere and culture on the campus. And he's also talked about the atmosphere and culture around the general community. The students were cautious around the general community, stores and shops and all that, because they didn't want any misunderstandings. But it was an interesting time. In general, it was an interesting time on college campuses all over the country. The winds of change were in all the campuses. The Vietnam War had reached a whole new zenith. We all had draft numbers, and the draft was being held every now and then. And the United States had invaded Cambodia, and there was shooting of student protesters in Kent State, and people were talking about, there were still protests and concerns about civil rights and civil liberties and equity and all that. And so all the students on this campus were all the students of goodwill, and all the black students, they were concerned about, equity and treatment and everything. And in most cases, it was positive. But I do know that some had not so positive, but they lived through it and they were better for it. But again, we stood on the shoulders of those who kind of was a trailblazer.
So, you talk, obviously there were in 1955, the Perkins students, theology school, those students really paved the way for students. And then I guess in 1965, I believe, when Levi's came, he paved the way for athletes. So as an athlete, how did you feel that you possibly contributed to that for future students?
Yes, I hope so. We try to, first of all, all the Pouncy and the Pouncy family, mother would say all the time, do not embarrass the family. And so what we tried to do all the time would be at our best, put our best foot forward to do the best thing do the best that we could do. And so that we saw that in track. I did Hayden Fry recruited us for football and track, and I was better at football than track, and I was the 5th man in Southwest Conference history to win 4 consecutive track sprint titles, and that wasn't hardly done, but we tried to put our best, foot forward, and to perform academically and in everything that we were involved in. And so, because I knew that those that would come after me will be required to do the same, and so we didn't want to dishonor the theology students or the folks in '65 or the folks prior to that or anybody that's been brought into this campus. We didn't want to dishonor them by not doing our best. So that was a lot of self-imposed pressure.
Yes, sir.
My brother and I, we just decided just do the best we could.
So obviously you grew up in South Dallas, you grew up in, you went to Lincoln High School. Did you feel any, going to SMU, you'd be staying in Dallas. So was there any thought process to that, geographically, staying in Dallas for college? Obviously you'd be with your family. But did you want to leave Dallas? Did you want to leave Texas, or?
Yeah, we were done. I signed a national letter of intent with Stanford, and it was pretty much a done deal. And USC was calling, and Alabama was calling, and Oklahoma was calling, and Kansas was calling, and Arkansas was calling, among others, Missouri. Yeah. All these people were calling, and Baylor, TCU were calling, and so we liked Stanford, and I wanted to do certain things. I wanted to major in physical therapy or something, and so Stanford was my place until we met Jim Parr, and then we had gotten involved with the Upward Bound program on this campus, and so we became a little bit more familiar with this campus and the history of the campus, but we also saw the potential. We saw the potential what this campus could offer us, like any student. Yeah. And so the potential was there, and so it was a no-brainer when Coach Parr and then Coach head football coach came out and said, we want you guys to do a 4-year scholarship. Mother was happy because she kept her twin boys home. We were not too, we kind of wanted to, kind of get away from home a little bit, but you just couldn't overlook the fact. We realists. We looked at it and say, this is the place for us. The timing, the place, the time. This is the right time and the right place for us, and we just never look back. Both of us went on and got a master's from this campus. And then we had another gentleman from our track team, Rufus Shaw. He came. He had already enrolled in Stanford. He had spent a semester in Stanford, Rufus Shaw. And he withdrew from Stanford and enrolled here with us. And he ran on that relay with us. And we set along with Michael Rito, we set a Southwest Conference, a tied a Southwest Conference record in the sprint relay, 4x100 relay, 39.8 or something. And he came from Stanford, and Rufus finally, he went on and got his MBA out here at the School of Business, and then Rito also, I think Rito, he got his degree in business out here at the School of Business, and I did I got my bachelor's in journalism and MLA, and then Gene got a bachelor's in I don't know, communications or something in the MLA. And so we all kind of did our thing academically, and it was the right place for us.
Yeah. So tell me about competing in the Southwest Conference. Just obviously you guys were amazing at it, so it must have been fun winning. But yeah, just tell me about some experiences there.
That was the old Southwest Conference. That was the Southwest Conference during the heyday of the conference. Texas, Arkansas, TCU, Baylor, SMU, I'm trying to think of some others. I'm drawing a blank. It was the highlight. It was the highlight. The high point of the conference. Those track meets and those football games and those athletic events were pretty spirited, and we would have triangle meets, and we would have track meets at Texas and Arkansas and TCU, Texas Tech, A&M, competing against those guys from Texas and A&M, the Mills brothers, Curtis and Marvin Mills at A&M, all those fine sprinters and people at Texas. It was pretty good, and so it was an exciting period of time. The greatest track and field athletes in the world were in the Southwest Conference at that particular time, a period of 1970 to 74. We're talking about all those guys. Sammy Walker from SMU here in the shot put, the Marvin and Curtis Mills from A&M in the sprints. Curtis was the world record holder in the 400 meters, and it goes on and on and on. Down in Texas, they had great athletes, and Tech and Baylor. It was quite a big deal, and so the Southwest Conference was a pretty strong conference at that time, and then it eventually dissolved because of, I don't know what other reasons, but it did.
Was it hard to balance school and athletics and academics and athletics, obviously?
No, not really. It was all involved in the organization. Now, if you look at all the guys who came from Lincoln High School that enrolled in SMU, it was myself, my brother Gene, and Rufus Shaw. With all due respect, we're all pretty good students, had pretty good grade point averages, else we couldn't get into those, Stanfords. Stanford did not offer athletic scholarships. Stanford offered academic scholarships, so you had to qualify for an academic scholarship to compete in athletics at Stanford at that time. And so you learn how to balance and order your life, how to study and how to do those things. The Upward Bound Project helped a little bit in that because we were involved in Upward Bound, but we also had outstanding teachers and mentors at Lincoln High School. Some of the best teachers in the world at Lincoln High School that prepared students to go off to college. For example, in our graduating class in 1970, I don't know, I guess 65, 70% of those students went on to college and graduated from college. And they're physicians and lawyers and educators. I worked 8 years as a reporter for the Dallas Morning News when I left this place. I taught 5 years. In the Carrollton Farmers Branch School District, I taught economics and social studies, history, and those things. And while I was working at Dallas Morning News, I started working on my teacher certification and administrative certification through the University of North Texas, and they placed me at Newman Smith High School in Carrollton. I went in as a student teacher in 1982. I stayed there 34 years and left as principal. I taught 5 years and administration 29 years, and the last 15 years I was principal. Gene was a professor of English and at El Centro College for, I don't know, a gazillion years, 40 years or something like that. Rufus Shaw was a business guy and into all those things that he did in the financial community. Michael Rideau, who was on that relay with us, he from Beaumont, got a degree in business. He's the vice president still to this day of an area bank. And so all the folks that came into this system, came into this university, they were ready to compete academically. And and we were proud of the academic skills. We were students first and athletes second. We felt like we had to excel first in the classroom before you can excel on any other quote field of dreams.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So you guys clearly had your priorities straight in college.
Mm-hmm. Now there was some athletes that were here, and that were here for other reasons. I mean, they was here just to do, football or basketball or something. But the majority of them, in the class of 70, were dead on. They were getting ready for law school. They were getting ready for graduate school. They were getting ready to teach or to go into business or banking or something. And so when the groups got together, that's the kind of talk that you heard. That's dialogue you heard from those groups. And they ignored some of the other foolishness that they may have bumped into out in the community or on campus, which was rare, but it happened, and so it was a pretty dynamic group of folks.
Looking back on your 4 years in college, and do you wish that you had done anything differently at SMU?
Yes, I do. I wish I had gotten more involved in student governance or student clubs and student organizations. I was so focused on what I was focused on, doing my little thing in journalism, doing my little thing what I wanted to do in track and and all those kind of things. That's the one thing I regret, that I did not just take a step back and say I'm gonna get involved in student governance or get more involved with the campus, and that's the one thing, because I kind of watched the Rufus Cormiers of the world do certain things, and the Charles Howards and I sit back and say, I kind of missed out on that aspect of college life, but I was just so focused and driven on the business at hand, and it was the curriculum, and it was trying to win a 4th Southwest Conference title, I guess, and so.
So then after your undergraduate degree, did you get your master's right away?
Oh yeah.
You got your master's?
Yeah. What happened was I graduated in '74, and then I was hired at the Dallas Morning News as a reporter, and I did that for 8 years. And about 82, I think, 81 maybe, or 82, I got the master's of liberal arts. What happened was, I think his name was Bryson. He was dean of the School of Continued Education out here. They had put in a program called the Masters of Liberal Arts program, and I just loved all those things. I loved the economics, the history, the psychology, sociology, all those things. A jack of all trade, master of none. But the deal is, I love just the concept of learning, and it was in my wheelhouse. So I enrolled in that program and finished that program, and got my master's. And then my brother, he wanted to know what I was doing. I said, I'm doing this great program at SMU called MLA. So quite naturally, he had to copy me, And so he jumped in there, and he finished that program too. But so we went on and got a master's in '82. Got my administrative certification in '83 or so to be a secondary school principal, and haven't looked back.
And how was being the principal of Newman Smith? Obviously, a huge public school.
It was outstanding. It was outstanding. Some of the greatest teachers in the world were there, and still there. Some of the greatest students. Newman Smith for the last 25 plus years was rated as one of the best high schools in the country by Newsweek magazine. It consistently had top graduates with excellent SAT scores and PSAT scores. We would give almost 1,000 AP advanced placement exams every year, and then more than, 45, 55, sometimes 65% of those kids would make a 3, 4, 5 passing grade. The average kid could graduate from that campus with 30 or more college credits as a senior in high school, and they can enroll at the University of Texas or some other university as a sophomore those kind of things. It was tremendous. In 2008, that school was so honored to have a visit by Barack Obama, who came and visited that campus in 2008. He was the night of the Texas primary. That was March 3rd, 2008, the night of the Texas primary. He came and visited Newman Smith High School, and he said he wanted to speak only to my juniors and seniors, and because he heard about those juniors and seniors, and he did a great job talking to those juniors and seniors about college and careers and things. You still can see that on C-SPAN. Just type in Obama Carrollton, and you'll see it on C-SPAN, and then just think that was in March. And 7 months later, he was elected president of the United States. And so our goal was that we want our kids to not only read about history, but to be a part of it and to live it. We've had congressmen and senators. When our kids were studying NAFTA, we brought in the House Majority Leader, Dick Armey, to talk to the students about NAFTA. And he wrote the legislation on NAFTA. We've had congressmen and senators and people all the time come up and give our students update. That would be every year on what's going on in the country, what's going on in business, what's going on in politics. And so that's the high caliber, that's the quality of keen academics that we try to impress upon the students at Newman Smith High School. And part of that came from our experience here too, but that's what we tried to do. And so just from that Obama visit in 2008, we had a large majority of our students enrolled in law schools all over the country. They were at Georgetown Law and you name it, all over the country. We even had one out here at SMU, enrolled in SMU Law School out here. And so it was a great experience for us. I retired this past June of 2017 after 34 years as a teacher and administrator, 29 as an administrator, as assistant principal, associate principal for curriculum, and principal at Newman Smith, all in the same place. It's kind of unheard of for a person to be a principal 15 years or be in administration 29 years at the same high school. That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. But that happened for me because that was just my thing. It was my place. It was just meant to happen. And so that's what I've been doing. We've graduated, I don't know, good Lord, 65,000 kids off that campus in my 34 years.
Yeah. That's crazy. You graduated a whole town.
And yes, and we still hear from a lot of them. They're physicians, they're attorneys, they're city councilmen, they are people, they are movie people, won Grammys producing music with Kirk Franklin. One is he was the background lighting for some of the Star Wars movies and all this. They're doing all kinds of fantastic stuff. And they will call me or email me or tweet me and say, Pouncy, this is what I'm doing. Pouncy, this is what I'm doing. What do you think about this? And so it's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. And how has retirement been for you? It's
been good. I'm getting a little antsy now. I got to find something else to do because it's been almost in June. In June of this year, it'll be 1 year. And I said I'd give myself 1 year off, then I'm gonna start my second life. And so I'm looking to start my second life.
Any ideas yet? I
have no earthly clue. Somebody out there help me, but I have no earthly clue, and so I'm open.
Mm-hmm. Maybe some of the I know you're interested in radios, and I guess you were in the radio club here at SMU? Or?
Well, no. I've been involved in amateur radio, ham radio for, I don't know, 30 years. Okay. And I got involved with that when I was a reporter at the Dallas Morning News. A lot of the photographers, a couple of photographers that were there had what we call 2-meter amateur radio equipment in their car. Those are transceivers, and they could transmit and talk to people all over the place, and it intrigued me. And they could make phone calls from their car and work through the landlines. At the time, cell phones were not prevalent. You know, if you wanted a cell phone in your car, a mobile phone in your car, it'd be a box of equipment in your trunk, and they had the handset. It was a big old bulky thing, and it was just a mess. And it caused a mint to use those things, and so they would use amateur radio to interface the phone lines using an encoder going through a repeater, and they could talk to people on the phone off the radio. And so it was intriguing to me. So I took the FCC amateur radio operator's test, and I'm a general class operator right now. And I love technology. I love tech. I love anything that's tech, and I tinker with antennas and radios and those kind of things.
So, if you were a senior in high school again, and you were looking at all these offers you had, you know, all these schools want you. Would you pick SMU and Jim Parr again?
Yes. You can't beat quality. You can't beat good people, and that's what we saw in Jim Parr, and the quality of programs here, second to none. You know, we had professors, Darwin Payne and Farrar, and I can't think of others. You know, think with Dr. Fox, things named Bill Fox, Bob McGrath. I can't think of some others. Tommy Edwards and Upward Bound. You know, it was just a list of things that that kept you kind of intrigued and saying, hey, that's pretty interesting stuff. You know, and so I don't think I would make a different selection. Stanford did intrigue me, though. Stanford. Now if I had attended Stanford, I probably would have taken just a completely different educational route, because I've gone off into physical therapy or something like that. And at the time, I don't think they offered physical therapy here on this campus. And so I like to write, and I like that kind of stuff, so I did the journalism thing. But I think I would probably come back. And just to let you know that this place was attractive to other kiddos when Rufus decided to leave Stanford and transfer here. And he was on a full scholarship there too. And he said, well, I'm gonna come over to, well, he wanted to get around us. I guess he wanted to be around,
Winners.
Yeah, well, you said it, the winners. I mean, you said it. But he joined us. But no, I don't think there would be a hesitation. Now, was this place utopia? No. Could we all could have been better? Yes. Could we have been better? Yes. Were there instances? Sure. But you don't dwell. You build on the foundation that's been given you, and the folks that came before us laid some pretty serious, sturdy foundation.
Most definitely. All right, well, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about today?
No, I just hope that I was just trying to give kind of a overall climate and culture of Dallas, because Dallas culture ties into this place too.
Well, yeah. What was the culture of the immediate area? University Park, Highland Park, in northern Dallas.
Well, we didn't matriculate in those areas a whole lot, because you always run the possibility of a misunderstanding. They didn't know who or who you are or what you're about, and they're going to always assume the stereotypical stuff.
So you felt that you felt kind of fenced off from this area. Most of the students, African American students, to my knowledge, did not travel in those areas for obvious reasons. They stayed within the environments where they felt comfortable, and they felt that there was some reasonable measure of safety and all this, and so to avoid misunderstandings, and some people had stereotypes, and some people still do, and so what they did, they just stayed within
a friendly environment, and stayed within the groups, and some spread out, people were a little careful, they were a little cautious, and for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm.
And then, well, you were very involved in Upward Bound, and I think that's all. It's a big reason you that introduced you to SMU, and kind of led to you coming here. So can you just tell me more about that, about Upward Bound?
Upward Bound was a program that was federally funded and was put in place at universities throughout the country to recruit and to equip kids from inner city, minority kids, from low-income families, and to kind of sharpen those tools to get them ready for college. The Upward Bound target schools would be Lincoln and Pinkston and Roosevelt and Madison and those schools in the inner city of Dallas. Your parents you would have to be the first generation from your family, to go to college. Your parents couldn't be college graduates. I knew that was going to happen.
No worries.
Your parents could not have been, a college graduate. So you had to be the first, and so they reached out from the Upward Bound office to us while we were at Lincoln High School, and we didn't know anything about it. And said, "Well, do y'all want to do this college kind of prep program out of SMU on Saturdays, and then you have to spend some summer months there, and then you had to do some classes in the summer and all that." And we said, "Sure." We said, "Sure." We think it'd be a good idea.
Yeah, and I think that alone was another effort from SMU. Clearly SMU in the 50s and 60s was attempting to change and kind of be ahead of the world, or at least the country, and that's just another example of them kind of doing that there.
But there were with the professors they were hiring and some other things, but it's like we told students, like I used to tell students all the time, is not where you go, it's what you do when you get there, and what you put into it, and so you don't dwell a lot on the negatives. You change what you can change, you fix what you can fix, and then you move on and try to make it better and try to leave it better, and that's what those folks before us have done. That's why I keep coming back to them. If those folks had not been here, we it might have been different for us, because then we would have been more on the forefront instead of they, and with the abuse and the things that Levi's had to deal with, and some of these other folks had to deal with, and so it was a little different. But the Upward Bound program with Tommy Edwards and those folks that helped run that program, they were outstanding, and they gave students a pretty clear overview about college life and those kind of things. That's what helped us. Although I still wonder what would happen if I'd gone to Stanford. I might be governor of Texas or something right about now. I don't know, but.
Well, any closing words? Anything you'd like to say? No.
Just thank you for the opportunity. I hope I could help provide some information about the overall atmosphere, climate here. Any organization is just good as the people, and there's going to be problems wherever you go, and all you do is try to keep working to make yourself better, to kind of function in this global society we live in. You're going to have people who are sensitive in all organizations, and the only difference back then, some were outright, with it. They were up front with it. Some were more clandestine with it. Then it just kind of died off a little bit, and it kind of went underground. In today's time, you see it coming forefront. It's right in your face today. you know, in politics and government and in all areas of society. You know, you see it, it's right out front. And so that's why good institutions, good academic institutions, whether it's a high school or a college, they are needed to help us as far as, you know, making this overall democracy better, making everything better for everybody. And we need those forerunners, you know, so thank God for them.
Yes, sir. All right, well, thank you, sir.
All right, man.
Appreciate it. All righty.